Hello, welcome to the Family Law Cafe podcast. Today I have two wonderful family law solicitors, both from Keystone Law. I work with them with Family Law Cafe, and they are Corinne Park, who sits here.
Hi there.
And Bethan Hill Howes, who sits next to her.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello. I'm laughing about my introductions because I was in court the other day, and we were, I think, an hour into the hearing, and the judge said, "I just want to check something, Miss Toch. The guy sitting behind you, is that the father?" And I was like, "No, it is. It's just George, my assistant." And he'd been wrongly seen as a father to these two young children, and he doesn't have any children as yet. And then the father was patiently sitting beside him, who was wearing a suit and was mistaken for the lawyer. So, introducing you as lovely family law solicitors. We work together, don't we, all the time?
Do, yes.
And I brought you in because I think it might be interesting for people that are thinking of using Family Law Cafe to know a little bit more about the solicitors in our network. Obviously, a lot of people come directly to you, and you deal with that more conventional instruction. But happily, you are happy so far to work with Family Law Cafe. How have you found that generally? You can be honest.
Oh, good. It's brilliant. I mean, we've been working together for about 2 years now, I think.
Yes.
And it's really good to be able to help clients that maybe need a little bit of extra support. And it's really good.
Yeah.
Works really well.
Bethan.
Yeah.
Honesty.
No, we like it. I think it's nice to have someone on board that's another professional that can add that kind of layer that sometimes you don't get until counsel are instructed 3-6 months down the line. So it's nice to have that other person that can kind of rein the client in if they're stressed or difficult.
Yeah, because what we're trying to do is as soon as someone comes to us, just throw as much expertise as they can cope with, and that can mean that things are not quite as they thought, and so maybe I'm giving them the good or the bad news first before they get to you. Do you find that you take on people who have sort of slightly skewed ideas of what's going to happen?
All the time. I had one yesterday where they saying, "Oh, it's really simple, it's really fine," and then it's one of the most complex things ever, and they don't tend to get it until you tell them, and then it's that panic over their face.
Yeah.
Like, hang on a minute, how am I going to get through this? How much is it going to cost? It's going to be a war. We had that yesterday, didn't we, on one of ours?
And sometimes people say it's really complex, and then I look at it and think it's not complex at all, because I think there's this confusion about what's legally complex and what's emotionally complex. And obviously that person that came to you was thinking it was simple, maybe it was simple emotionally, but then you saw the legal complexities. Yeah. Anyway, before all of that, and we can just get into all of that, just want to hear more about you. So I'm going to start with you, Corinne. What made you get into law or family law?
So I decided to do law from a very early age while I was still doing my exams at school. So I took more of the traditional approach of straight through university. I did university at UEA. Law at university, and then went straight into law school in London and then into my training contract. I've worked for a huge variety of firms, both regional and central London, so I've seen kind of all the different types of cases that there are. And I love it. I fell into family law by mistake. Wasn't going to be a family lawyer, but I was always a people person, always wanting to help people rather than just do transactions.
Mm-hmm. And just let me take you back before I go on to that. So did you go to a private school or state school?
No, I went to state school in Upminster.
Here you're an Essex girl.
I am. I'm proud of it. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
State school and then university. Absolutely.
And also, I think you were quite into your music at school.
I was.
Yeah.
I'm an oboist. I haven't played for a lot of years, but yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it was something to take you away from your studies as much as anything. I would love to get back to it, but literally don't have the time, unfortunately.
The thing about family law it's quite all-consuming, isn't it? How about you, Bethan? So how come you got into law? Was it something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, completely. I think I was quite similar to Corinne. I always wanted to do law. I was never going to do anything else. So I didn't have any backup plans. Same sort of traditional route, went to law school at Cardiff and then straight to my LPC and then straight into my training contract in Bristol. And then I met Corinne in London 2 years ago.
Oh, I want to get into the whole dynamics with you two because you're, I was going to say Batman and Robin. I think that's quite rude.
I'm Batman.
But yeah, you work very well together and you bring different energies. Obviously, you're Corinne, a bit like me, vastly experienced. I hope we can say not old at all.
So.
Young,
I like to think
young
so.
but very experienced. And Bethan with a lot of energy and ideas. And I think you also went to state school, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Because I'd like to just people to know that it's obviously whatever school you go to, then that's great, isn't it? But sometimes people think it's really tough to qualify as a lawyer and to get the training contract and to get the pupillage, and you need to have lots of connections. So I know all three of us are, we're proudly from state schools. I just refused to actually go to a private school. I don't know why. I was some kind of intellectual snob, I think.
Actually, I did as well. I refused to. Yeah.
I thought there was just more interest in the school I was at. It just had 42 people in the class. I thought that was really fun, rather than small.
I didn't have a choice.
You didn't have a choice, and you're from Wales, aren't you?
Yeah.
And also, I think you were good at sport, or you're quite sporty.
I was the sporty kid at school. Yeah, I was an athlete for a long time, and then packed it in to do my last year of uni, and then get on and get into the real world.
And so, what was your sport?
So I was a long jumper and high jumper.
Long jumper and high jumper. Okay. So what are the skills? I mean, I thought that they were completely different. Or you can be good at both. Does that mean you have really quite sort of a high fiber twitch muscles or something like that? Are you good at plyometric?
Yeah, and that's part of all the training.
I'm terrible at that. Yeah.
I think I started off as a sprinter, but I wasn't very good with the gun because it would stress me out. So I would always be like that in the blocks. So I was like, I can't do this anymore.
So were you slow or you jumped the gun?
I was really fast, but then I was too fast out the blocks. So it became a bit too stressful for me. So I thought, I'm pretty fast. I can do that in a straight line into some sand.
Yeah, good sprinters are usually pretty good long jumpers, obviously. Yeah. And so what did you prefer, long jump or high jump?
Long jump, I think, because I felt high jump was more on show, whereas long jump you can kind of hide. People didn't really follow it as much, so you didn't have the same pressure as you did if you were jumping in the middle of a stadium. So everyone
in the whole stadium is clapping as you go
which
up
I hated, because it would always put you off rhythm.
And you're so out of the rhythm, everyone's doing, okay.
No, I wasn't,
not for you.
Not my bag.
Not you like crowds one? No.
I may look like it, but no, I wanted to hide in the corner.
Quietly long jumping.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what level did you reach?
I was an international athlete for a long time. Enjoyed it, but it was really quite demanding on my time, especially when, your first year at uni is more social than academic, and then second year obviously kicks in a little bit more, and third year was really quite important, and I couldn't devote 6 days a week to train anymore and pass my exams and be where I wanted to be. It was always a hobby for me. I just happened to be pretty good at it.
Oh yeah. I was just doing it as a hobby when I had to train.
Get me fit. Yeah.
But it's tough, isn't it? Because I had the same thing. I was in the rowing team, and it was always, should I be doing this? And I remember saying to a coach when I was 22, oh, what should I do? And she actually said, I think you should retire, which was the sort of thing that, okay, I'm not going to then. Exactly. And she had the whole build up. It was a woman coach. So I have no idea to this day why she suggested that. Made no sense. But that kind of kept me going for a few more years.
I think it makes you really competitive. And I think that's good for any kind of law. To have that kind of competitive drive.
Also, you learn to lose, don't you?
Yes.
I know that sounds strange, but not. Sometimes people don't have that. Sometimes it's not all going to go well in your cases, and it's hard. It's hard if you you know, you get a bad result because you do get involved and you don't want that. And I don't know.
Well, you're invested, aren't you, in it? And you become quite invested because with family law, it's not a transaction, they're people.
Yeah.
And they become quite emotionally attached to us as advisors, whatever that may be. And you become quite invested in that case and you want them to get the result that they want. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it's not because of the strength of the case, it's a judge or
There's
the
so
day.
many aspects, aren't there? Because you've got the parties, you've got their lawyers, you've got then other people who are sort of on their team, and then you end up in front of a judge, and it can just be one thing that's like, you know, you can have a fantastic case and then something can just turn, even at a hearing.
Oh, the tiniest facts or the tiniest pieces of information that come to light suddenly can just change everything, which is why you love it, because you never quite, no case is ever the same, and everyone has their personal story, which is individual to them and makes every case
See, I think family law is the hardest of any aspect of law. Of course, I would say that, and you would agree. But because if sometimes people come in to Family Law Cafe, someone just came in just this week and started by a series of questions. I was giving the answer, but it's all fact specific, you know, about spousal maintenance, about capital gains tax, like this or that. But it's fact specific to the whole, you know, you've got to have the whole view, and then you might not know about the other side. So it's a sort of moving situation, isn't it? Anyway, to get back to you, Corinne. So you went to University of East Anglia, loved it.
loved every minute.
Then how did you start in law? Or where did you
So I went to law school in central London, and then I trained at a firm called Bethan Partners, which has got offices in Southend in Essex and also in central London. So I had a mixture of both. I wasn't going to be a family lawyer. I thought I was going to do medical negligence or personal injury, but fell into family and learned on my feet.
So what's the story? What's the story behind that?
I think it was the head of department at the time when I was still a trainee, suddenly left overnight, leaving a full caseload of work. And as I was the most senior trainee, they asked me if I wanted to pick it up and run with it. And a kind of deer in the headlight situation. But I think they knew, obviously, they'd got to know me over the last 18 months and knew that I was a people person and knew that hopefully they thought I was capable.
It would suit you. So
And
it chose you,
that.
really,
It
didn't
did choose me.
Yeah.
It was fate.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've gone from there, strength to strength.
And then how about you, Bethan? So how did you get into family law? Did you intend to do that?
No, I was the same as Corinne, completely by chance. I never considered family. I wanted to do dispute res like all the other trainees, and then I was playing netball at the time. There was a match on in my firm that I was training in, and the captain was the just turned NQ in the family team, and she said, "Why don't you try it?" Oh, I don't want to do family. Loved it from day one, just absolutely adored it, fell in love with it. And I had a really good head of department who was a bit sort of, you will do this and you will get on with it and you will sink or swim. And he was excellent, I adored him, but he was very much off you go and we'll see how you get on. And yeah, rest is history.
So you both had that similar experience, didn't you? Get on with it, deal with it.
It's the best way of learning sometimes, as long as you've got somebody that you can double check things with. Sometimes I think it is just a sink or swim situation. You have to learn on your feet.
Yeah. And so, Bethan, what attracts you most to family law? What do you like about what you do?
I think Corinne and I talk about this a lot because we obviously work together really closely, and I think it's that ability to put that person in a better position than you found them in, because they come to you because things have already gone wrong. They're in one of the most crucial parts of their life. It's really distressing, it's upsetting, they could be angry, and to get them to a place where they are in a financial better position or whatever it is with the children, but also in a better emotional position and see them be able to restart their life and kind of move on from it, I think is the most rewarding part of it. It's not necessarily the financial outcome that they get, it's seeing them be able to see a life from divorce. I think that's what we always talk about.
Yeah, often kind of with my cases usually it comes to an end and there's always that moment where you're like, let's have a hug.
Yeah.
Because everyone's
Can I
like,
hug you?
yeah, can I hug you? Sometimes people ask and sometimes they don't. Only happened to me once when I did crime, and it happened in court where a man just grabbed me and he just was hugging me so tightly. And it's quite completely, because he'd just been acquitted. In court.
The emotion.
He was so emotional. That did actually happen. That was quite, it just came to me. I'd forgotten about that. In a London Crown Court.
In a London, oh.
But, in a more gentle way after a family case, because, there is that satisfaction that people are in a better position. And I don't ever want to leave it until they are, I'll be honest. And you do have some ups and downs, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. There will be things that come up and it's managing the client's expectations and telling them, look, okay, this is a problem, but we can get over it by doing X, Y, and Z. And telling them that there is a way through this rather than just panicking and not knowing where to go, or if we have to go and get some advice from maybe a different type of lawyer or a financial advisor and knowing who to go to. I think the clients really appreciate it.
And that's what I like about Keystone Law and the way you work, because we're doing, like, one of the matters we're dealing with, you were like, here's the company lawyer, in a meeting the next day, limited to what that person will do, so it doesn't race up the costs. So working as a team, because you're very open to doing that, whereas some solicitors will be very much come to us and it just stays with us, and I can understand that. I've worked in solicitors' offices, but I do think that it's nice to be able to work with others and work in a team, because it is better for the client at the end of the day.
That's the whole ethos of Keystone, is that they're a team, and we have a enormous, like 600 plus pool of partners and specialists in areas that we can go to at any point.
Yeah, because you just cannot come out of your area, can you? But I think because obviously you're looking after someone, so understandably they want to take advice from you, but you cannot be in that position of giving advice about things that you don't know enough about. I mean, capital gains tax calculation. I could do a capital gains tax calculation, but I wouldn't want to be relying on that, because let's get someone else to do it.
Well, it doesn't benefit the client, does it? At the bottom line is you can try and do it, but what does that achieve? And you could be putting them in a detrimental position.
Thoughts on the family law system as it's running? What are your thoughts?
It needs an upgrade, let's put it lightly.
Yeah. What level are we now, and where does it need to go?
Difficult questions.
Are we saying level 2?
Politely, I think there needs to be, you can't start again, because that's just not practical or possible, is it? But the system is broken, and what's the answer? I think that's an impossible answer to a difficult question.
We
Where
need
do you
a
start?
radical overhaul, doesn't it?
Completely.
I would say root and branch overhaul. That's my view.
I mean, it's been 2 years since they introduced the no-fault divorce, and I think everyone was hoping that was going to be the answer to all their prayers, and it hasn't been. Because yes, it takes the argument out of the actual divorce and the heat out of that, but it doesn't remove the financial issues, it doesn't remove any children problems, and actually people still need help with those. And the court system is completely overwhelmed. And finding a way around that and not necessarily relying on the court so much is probably the way forward, but it's not an easy answer.
It's because you've got two different parties, and one may want to use the court system and one doesn't. I mean, tell us about some of the problems you've experienced.
Well, most of it, I mean, we would love to do more private FDRs, but there comes a massive cost to that. So I think some clients that aren't necessarily in the high net worth bracket can't afford a private FDR.
So private FDR being that the parties engage perhaps a retired judge, and at a time of their choosing, they might do that in a solicitor's office or a place that they choose, and then have a court, effectively as like a shadow court hearing, but they don't have to wait for the court.
So it provides that time beneficial for them, but it then is an additional cost, and people can't afford it. So then the people that can't afford those type of things are stuck in the court system when you can't get FDR listings for months and months and months, or the court, you slip through the gap and then you're back to where you started again. So I think where we can do round tables, but again, that's a cost. And then it's that cost to benefit analysis for that client. Well, do I just wait for a hearing, or do I shell out all of that money? And what happens if the FDR fails? You'll still be back in the system where you were. So it's difficult.
Just thinking of, it's interesting that I get the feeling that the family justice system is trying to say, hey, when your assets are low, then you should go elsewhere. When, if you think about it, maybe the people with high assets, they should go elsewhere. They shouldn't use the court. They can afford to do it privately. So they ship them all off. And then, because it's actually really difficult, isn't it, where you have a case where there's lots of debts, and how do you share the debts? And there's not enough so a house for both people. So people cannot afford to litigate because they might be looking at 30 or 50,000 to litigate, and if they lose 50 to 100,000 on both sides, and they can't each have a house. They've lost it.
It's when there's limited needs, limited assets, and somehow you've got to meet both parties' needs in that. It's really difficult.
Yeah, it's challenging.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
And often you get one party has slightly more power or more control over things or more knowledge, and being able to take that into account is much more difficult than when there is a larger pot as such to divide between the parties.
And parties can't then afford to raise points. So you could have one party who's run up lots of debts, but the judge is going to say, no, you can't raise conduct. And understandably, it is expensive to raise. So they're in the worst kind of position. Whereas if they had millions, then it's kind of cost effective. They could raise it. But the answer then is, why don't they just go and, as I say, do it privately?
It's an imbalance of power.
Well, that's most of our job, actually, is there are arguments for things that could make it more complex, but most of our job is saying, well, actually, where's that going to get you in the grand scheme of things with your assets? I mean, you can raise it if you want to raise it, but you're throwing money upon money on this, when the reality is your assets don't allow for that. So that, again, that's managing the client, saying, look, we get you, we understand it, but it's not going to take you anywhere with your level of assets. And I think that's the problem as well, them kind of grasping that, yes, it may be unfair in their eyes, they see it as immorally unfair, or wherever they are. Trying to bring them down to a practical level in line with the court system is really difficult sometimes.
What's your thoughts about fact-finding hearings in children matters and the costs there? Because you might have one party who has a benefit of public funding, so there is no cost to them, and then another party who's facing serious allegations who has to fund that.
So they're massively expensive, and there's no getting away from that, because you need experienced counsel on it. You need the work to go into that, the drafting, the allegations, the witness statements, the exhibit bundles, the responses then. And I think sometimes I don't think the judges quite understand the cost that goes into all of those things. I've had a few cases now where the judges understandably are trying to get all of the information before they decide at earlier hearings, but obviously that incurs quite a lot of cost if they're then not going to agree that a fact find is needed. But then when you do have fact finds, there's no escaping that you need them, but they're just so expensive, and there's nothing you can do with that. You need counsel, and you need those documents drafted, and you need to attend. It's really tricky.
It's so tricky, and on both sides. And then, there are people that come to me and they're not raising allegations, even though there are quite serious matters, and they don't want things to drag out, and then in other cases, it's difficult to say, isn't it, because it's all subjective, but maybe that you get points raised in other cases where you think is quite minor in a sense.
I agree
do
with
you
you.
need to have the fact finding, and then there's it have full fact finding that's dragged out. There doesn't seem to be any real consistency.
No, there's not, because I've had cases where you think there absolutely should be a fact find on this, and a judge on the day says no. And then you have other ones where you think you don't need it, and you get it. It's really inconsistent. And I think you're right. There are some cases where actually let's just stop warring for the sake of it. They're not that serious to warrant such a big hearing and such a big cost. Let's just get on with it.
They need to focus on what's important, what they're trying to achieve, what's best interest of the children.
Exactly. What's the bottom line in all of this? Where does that get you in terms of contact? Because it's not about you being vindicated against ex-husband or ex-wife. This is about the children, and I think that's where it gets lost. Maybe sometimes it's not necessarily the focus is on the child, it's on feeling that vindication that those things happen to you, especially in domestic abuse. Of course it's really serious, but sometimes that becomes more of an issue than actually the welfare and the contact arrangement.
It's so complex, and as I say, I feel it's inconsistent, and sometimes it feels like no one knows when to stop this.
No.
You know, it's just going on and on and on. And someone makes an allegation, then there's a counter allegations, then we look at that one, and then something else.
And then it's too late, isn't it?
And life is, there's going to be new things happening all the time. Also, there's so much material we can get now with texts, messages, emails, WhatsApps, recordings, lots of recordings now, which courts don't like.
They don't like at all. And I think the courts, to be fair, are still taking quite a cautious approach with recordings, which I think is the right decision to make, because you can manipulate recordings, you can decide when you're recording. You know, a lot is said about the recorder rather than the recordee, but I think there's a very swift change in, well, I've got recordings, so that means it's happened and it's true. It's hard. It's really tricky. Navigating that kind of complex case is tricky.
So tricky. So what do you think for the future then, for you, you know, you personally? And I mean, we kind of looked at, it's in a bit of a state, the family justice system, and we can only do our bits within it, obviously, and work within it. But how do you see your work going? What are you going to be focusing on?
I think people are very aware of the costs that are involved in these kind of cases, and I think people are want the opportunity to resolve it outside of court. So I think we are probably looking at more alternative options, whether that's mediation, whether that's collaborative, whether that's some kind of private resolution. I think that will become much more available to all types of clients. So I think that will become more wider ranging. But it's getting the awareness out that that's available to everybody. The courts are always going to be there, and we're always going to have to manage them, and there will always be cases that are litigated. But I think it's in some ways our job as solicitors to be able to kind of direct people through the right routes if we can. But divorces are always unfortunately going to happen, and we need to manage the client's expectations and help them when we can, really.
Bethan?
How do I follow that?
Well, what about all the things like, you know, AI, and whether there's going to be, you know, I've got someone who we've done some work with who keeps saying all these judges should be replaced by
I don't think that will ever work.
a computer-generated model.
That would be the worst thing, I think.
He's convinced that's the right thing.
Judges can make bad calls, but they are people, they understand it, and our work and our law is human-based. We're people lawyers, and I think some robotic judge making a decision without any emotion involved is a bad thing. Ultimately.
We're talking about families in the end, and the emotions and the children, and getting a robot or a computer to make a decision is just...
I think what frustrates me is that the system should be so efficient now, and you just don't get answers. I mean, I know that you've told me that I would expect the court to write back if a solicitor writes in, and I think you've said that just doesn't. Look at you, you're just laughing. It does not happen.
You send an email in, you're looking at about 6 weeks to get a response at the moment.
And if you call, they're all contact centres. They're not at the court now, so it's difficult, and they can't speak directly to the ushers in the court. So it's difficult to get any answers, and I think that's also where the problem lies, because I think clients that obviously aren't aware of how the system work kind of expect us to have an in with these courts, and we have no in, we have no control.
It's the thing that I've seen that's gone absolutely backwards in the last 15 years. I mean, you could actually turn up at a court office and people could go there and someone would sort it out and they would get the file and look at it, and you would be dealing with a person there who took responsibility. I mean, recently I went to a court, and because one of the things, just one of the small things they had done is at one stage they hadn't, I think there'd been an appeal and the judge had dealt with it on the day, and they took 6 months to send out the information to my client. And something else had happened in the case later on. I was trying to explain there was a problem with the listing. So I went to the counter, there were people there, but then I had to sit at a desk and email someone behind. They wouldn't, it just, please could you do this now? And it was, I went to, it was the case was listed, and I got there, and on the day they changed the listing that day. And I was just asking, could these two cases be put together, which they obviously needed to be, so this wouldn't happen again. It was as simple as that. And
I remember when I was a trainee, I used to be sent up to the Central Family Court, and my principal used to say to me, do not leave that court or that office until you have the answer, until you have the piece of paper in your hand. And they used to get there. It used to maybe take a couple of hours, but you would get the answer and you would get the listing or the direction from the judge. You just can't do that now.
Yeah. But that just reminds me of when I started in family law, and I just remember being in court and it's in my head, like, I'm not going to sit down till I get what I want. I'm not sitting down in the judge's face. Like, I remember that moment, I'm just not sitting down, and I'll get up again and until I get what I want. And I think we still try to do that. We will not stop until we get what we want, but it's not quite as easy. Now, what I do on my podcast is, in my network, I have a number of people, and I'm going to introduce you to someone else in my network who's going to be the guest.
Makes me nervous.
Oh, it makes me. You should be very nervous. Raina Da Costa, who's an amazing business lawyer. She's going to come and sit in my seat and just ask you a few questions about what you do.
Oh no!
And I'm just easy with the questions, but she's very, very tough lawyer. So be scared and enjoy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Hello, hi. So I've got 3 questions for you.
Okay.
One of them is, I often come across clients who are looking for family law services, but they have multi-jurisdictional issues.
Yes.
So, for example, say they were married in India, or they've got, a visa issue. How would you deal with such situations?
Bethan? Oh, okay. Well, if they're married in a different jurisdiction but living in the UK, then we're more than able to help them because their marriage would be recognised here. So we can deal with anything. We often have clients that have assets based in other jurisdictions, and the UK courts can still deal with those as part of a UK divorce, so that's not a problem. If there are other issues such as tax issues in another jurisdiction or immigration issues, I would always refer them to another colleague or an expert and tie those things together. So it's never a problem, something that we come across nearly on a daily basis these days.
That's great. My second question would be, do you use private investigators if, for example, assets are strewn all over the world?
Sometimes. It depends on what it is and why you need it. Judges don't tend to like them, but it's more of a fact-finding exercise for us to find those assets, or sometimes it's not assets, sometimes it's maybe seeing if they've got a new partner living in with them, things like that. So We can use them, we don't tend to because of the repercussions for using them, but they are available.
And you have to be mindful of the costs involved as well. So if they're, for example, if you're maybe trying to find assets, maybe in another jurisdiction, for example, you have to be mindful of the costs and whether that asset is actually worth finding, whether it's something that you would maybe have a claim over. But yeah, it's always an option to consider.
And my last question, very well answered so far. My last question is, I sometimes have ladies who are distressed, distraught, are not working, they can't afford services. What would you do, and how would you point them in the right direction to help them?
Depends on what their circumstances are. Are they married to someone that's got a lot of money? Because if they are, and the husband's the financially stronger party, there's means and ways that we can act for them. So we can ask husband to pay our legal fees. If he won't, we can try and get them a litigation loan. If they can't get funding, because lots of times the financially weaker party isn't on the mortgage or isn't on the land registry for things, you know, the imbalance in the relationship, then we can request that the court order husband to pay our legal fees. They tend to do it on an interim basis, so up to a certain hearing, and then if we need more money, we go again. But there's lots of ways that can happen, because we have lots of clients that come to us that don't have any money, but the other party does. If they can't get funding and they can't get any loans, then it is a more difficult conversation. But there are charities out there that can help, especially if they've been victim of domestic abuse, things like that. There are ways and means, and we will do absolutely everything we can to help them if we can, because they need legal advice and they should be entitled to that.
Yes, thank you.